Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. We're going to go through these defense closings today. Just a heads up, it may be tomorrow before I get this rebuttal testimony episode out because it's taken me all day. I've had a little technical issue here with my computer. All good now, but I've got about an hour before I'm going to be gone until right before we do our live, which is going to be around 9 o'clock. I'm hoping I'll put the link out later. I guess it really kind of doesn't matter if it comes out tomorrow because hopefully they'll be in deliberations. And I have not watched rebuttal at all. I do know Wilson got up there, and I think that was a smart decision. He's very good at addressing the jury. So real quick, if you guys know a way to stop juvenile cats from bringing in the body parts of dead rodents or birds, please let me know. If you've been a longtime listener, you know me and Sherlock kind of started this feline human journey together. I never had cats. I had one maybe when I was little. It ran away. So I learned how to be a cat mom with Sherlock, and we had this great bond. And then when my aunt died, the kids kind of duped me into getting these cute little brothers that were at the pound, under like the promise that they would feed them and scoop their litter box. And it ain't happened since like day 2. And half the time they're not even allowed in their rooms. But so these are my problems now. I do love them. They're very sweet. Sherlock hates me sometimes. But if you know any way to stop them from bringing in dead animal parts into my house where they're a millimeter away from me stepping on them full force, because I will die a death and my kids will come home from school and I'll be on the Persian rug. Like that's where they drop it, by the way. I'll just be laid out. Let me know. I can't keep them in. They dart out. I need like an Inspector Gadget arm where I can push a button and go real far and grab them because they're fast. I ain't that fast no more, y'all. I don't know what to do. Try to keep them in. Don't work. All right. So I'm going to put bells on them. Oh yeah. I'm gonna get cowbells. Oh, yeah, they'll hear them coming. All right, defense closings. Let's jump in because there's a lot to cover. My inbox filled up about 15 minutes into the closings. And so if you've left me a message in the last few days, my bad. I have not had time to go through them. I try to do some as much as I can, but you guys have really wanted my opinion on what I think about the defense closings. And I'm going to tell you right now, I think, and look, I don't want no haterade. It's not lost on me, the connection this family had. It's not lost on me that it's really unbelievable that George knew nothing and didn't go that night. But I will say Parker knocked it out of the park. Defense Attorney Parker did the best job he could have done for George on that closing, hands down, in my opinion. If I'm a juror, I've got some questions right now. I've got some reasonable doubt. I don't doubt his guilt, y'all. Don't hate me. But that's just how I feel. It was well done. So he thanks the jury for their patience and their sacrifice, saying he's not going to go as long as they might expect. He says, you guys determine the facts. He said, if he has done or said anything offensive, to hold that against him and Mr. Nash and not George. I think it's important to say because there were several times I know I had heard some jurors seem uncomfortable with this line of questioning with Tabby, also with how Julia from BCI was treated. I think there were some visible reactions from that jury, and that's a good thing to throw in there. He says, you're the best in Pike County. You stand between the power of the government and George Wagner, and the government is powerful. You've seen how many people they've had to work on this case, the resources such as the wiretaps. They've overreached in this case, especially when it comes to George. Have they proved it beyond a reasonable doubt? You're not here to solve a mystery. You've seen such a tragedy. It's unspeakable. There are many facts we have not disputed, but there are some, and that's why you're here. There's a couple of courtrooms I've been in that made an impression on me, and the jury box doesn't sit off to the side, and he kind of motions where they are. He points kind of to the main area of the courtroom where the public sits and said, right here in the middle of the public seating. That's important symbolism. You're the only ones who have sat through this for weeks and months. He says, when he's giving you the jury instructions, don't freak out. You'll have a copy of those instructions. The power of the jury is awesome. Court systems have been in place for over 200 years, and it's loosely based on Great Britain's system. We've tweaked it over the years, but most of our founding fathers were from there, so they brought their court system with them. In Scotland, they used to have 3 verdicts in criminal cases: guilty, not guilty, not proven. In America, we decided to combine not proven and guilty, and I think it's a healthy reminder because it's the state's burden to prove their case. In this case with the state, with respect to George, they paint with a very broad brush. How many times have you heard they, them, you guys, the Wagners? George is the one on trial. We're not here to defend Billy, Angela, or Jake. And basically, there were days and days that went by where you did not even hear George's name mentioned. And that's significant. George Wagner wasn't even a suspect in this case. They interviewed Billy, Jake, and Angela several times. They didn't interview George until the Montana border. Did they ever seize his phone? No. He wasn't a suspect because he didn't have a motive in this case. You heard George when he testified. They told him in Montana, either you're a suspect or you're a witness. So what are the charges? Obviously, aggravated murder. Sometimes I felt during the case I was in divorce court. All this talk about custody, this wasn't about custody, and we'll explain why. There was some mention yesterday of what motive would Jake and Angela have to lie. Well, they're facing the death penalty. They had the biggest reason in the world to say something to save their lives. I want to point out a few things to take note of. And so he pulls out an exhibit. It's an affidavit that's 77 pages. He says BCI agent Scheider went through this when I was cross-examining him. The investigation as of May 24th, 2018, so well into the investigation and 6 months before the Wagners were arrested, it lays out in great detail the investigation up to this point. And what I find interesting and what I pointed out to the agent is they don't have enough evidence to convict. And this is the application to get the listening devices installed into Jake and George's truck they drove. And that's really important. I suggest you take a look at it. With Jake, they want you to think he had some religious awakening that motivated his plea. I suggest otherwise. His lawyers went through all the evidence with him, and they explained to Jake, you have no chance. He was going to be convicted at trial and face the death penalty. He said people have conflicting views about the death penalty, but if we're going to have the death penalty, it's for someone like Jake Wagner, who killed 8 people. Who snuck in through a window in the middle of the night and murdered people one after another. He had great lawyers. They did a great job for him, but why would the state make such a deal? You need to ask yourselves that and discuss it, because their case against George wasn't strong at all. What did Jake tell you from the witness stand? He asked for the case against George to be dismissed. Why would he ask that if he was truly involved, like Jake said? With Jake and Angela, what they said about George can't be proven, but it can't be disproven. There's so much evidence and so much to talk about. I suggest you make a list. What's reliable? What's not reliable? On the reliable side, you have a lot of phone records. Really important stuff these days. Phone records of the victims are important here, and I'm referencing the last activity on the victim's cell phones. So he goes through. Kenneth, they call scene 4, last activity, 9:40 p.m. Chris Sr., scene 1, 11 p.m., last activity. Scene 2, Frankie and Hannah Hazel, her last activity, 1 a.m. Scene 3, 3:30 a.m., Dana is on social media. Why is that important? We know those times reflect for sure what time someone was alive. We don't know exactly what time they died, but we do know the last time they were alive. For example, how you should think about this. Hannah Hazel sent a text around 12:59 or 1 a.m. She was alive at that point. I don't know how long it takes somebody to fall asleep, but we know they were killed well after 1 a.m. Other than scene 1, Chris and Gary's, everybody was asleep with the exception of Dana. She was in bed, but not asleep. Why is that important? And this is so important. And this is what me and Biggie and Anjanette have been racking our brains about. Defense attorney says, because Jake gives a timeline that doesn't add up to these reliable records. If you remember on the stand, by the way, George said Jake's got his timeline wrong. He told the BCI agents at the border he went to bed at 12:30. On the stand, he said 10, big discrepancy. But that timeline discrepancy also could play into what George is saying, is that I never saw him leave. He says he and Billy left Peterson at 9, and he's in the back of that truck at 9-ish. They leave and go to Union Hill. 20 or 30-minute ride. He's in the truck a while, and then everything starts off, the killing. He wants you to believe that the shooting started around 11 when Chris Sr. called Billy's phone, but he also explains after scene 1, they walk over to Frankie's and Billy rattles the door to see if it's unlocked. That would be midnight. The dogs are barking and Billy's rattling the door. Frankie and Hannah Hazel still awake. They would have heard that, right? We know the timeline's way off. Another thing Jake says, they took this truck, the murder truck. And at some point, Jake kills Chris and likely Gary, and I'll get into that in a moment. But he says at some point they take Chris's truck to drive to Dana's and out to Kenneth's. What sense does that make? I know they said if Dana and Kenneth saw Chris's truck pull up, they wouldn't be surprised. But these are people who are supposed to be asleep. Chris's truck, no blood inside. Jake testified he hit a deer with the truck. He shows a picture of the truck to the jury. Is there any damage on this truck from a deer strike? No. They have the murder truck. Jake has just killed Gary and Chris, and they have scouted Frankie, supposedly. So they take Chris's truck and leave this one at the murder scene? What if somebody comes over? Kenneth took showers at 4 a.m. occasionally. What if somebody comes over and finds the dead bodies and found this truck that belongs to the Wagners in the driveway? Makes no sense. That was a really good point. And this whole route Jake talked about, this coming and going and circling back around, what sense does that make? This was a pre-planned murder. Why are you taking this truck and leaving it at one of the crime scenes? Why would you do that? What makes more sense you can rely on is the phone records. Kenneth was probably the first one killed. He was killed because they feared he would retaliate. He had nothing to do with custody, so it makes more sense to kill him first so he can't drop into Chris's. I think it's telling the state thought the same thing. They put it in count 1. I haven't had time to go look what that means, by the way. And his record show 9:40 was his last phone activity, so he was killed sometime after that. We don't know, but after that. It makes more sense. You start there at Kenneth's, then Chris, last activity 11 p.m., then Frankie, last activity 1 a.m., and end up with Dana, whose last activity is 3:30 a.m. After that, you get on Route 32, which is right by her house. You start the murders at the furthest point and work your way up the hill. Dana is last. Get on Route 32 and go where you go. Rather than this back and forth, leaving a truck here, taking another truck, it makes no sense. The state has presented ad nauseum that this is about custody. They're investigating this complicated case. It takes 2.5 years, and they find this Facebook message from Hannah Mae. You'll have to kill me first. Well, that's alarming in a murder investigation, but it doesn't make sense for one family to kill another family just for custody. I don't think anyone ever believed it was just about custody. Could it have been a drug deal? Nobody thought custody. Reason and experience teaches us this isn't about custody. Nobody kills a whole family over that. You think your child is being sexually abused? Yeah, that's a reason to kill. Jealous boyfriend? Yeah, it happens. Drug deals? Possibly. People don't kill over custody. Where did the idea for the murders come from? According to Jake and Angela, Angela said very clearly she thought Sophie was being abused, so she asked Sophie about it. Remember, Sophie is under 2 at this point, and Angela believed her, if she even said it. Angela goes to Billy and says, something's going on. We got to do something about it. I think it's Chris Sr. Billy says, nah, I know Chris. Then Angela says, well, we got to turn him in for the drugs. Billy says, no, because Billy's doing the drug dealing with Chris Sr., and that's just too close to home. Angela says, you got to figure something out. So some time goes by, and Billy says, we got to kill them all. Then he goes to Jake, and Jake says, we got to kill, or Billy goes to Jake and says, we got to kill Hannah Mae and her family. Defense attorney Parker says, I'm no fan of Jake, but Jake says no and walks out the room. But according to Jake, you can decide if you believe him. He confronts Hannah Mae about these allegations or the suspicion, and because unfortunately there was some of that at one point in her life, and Jake was aware of that. When Hannah Mae says, we'll take care of it, sets him off, he goes to Billy and says, I'm in. Jake and Billy made the plan to murder these people. Angela gets involved, but do you hear George's name? No. Do you hear a family meeting specifically to discuss these killings? No. When someone testifies, you have to consider their demeanor. Jake was laughing and smiling and smirking as he's talking about committing these murders. He's cold-blooded. I think he's psychotic. It's like he's talking about a football game on Monday morning. It's the way he's talking about killing these people. True. We didn't get to, well, no, we did hear that little leaked part, but he says, it's disgusting. He's a sick man. You can believe what he says. Angela, she's no better. She loved Hannah Mae like a daughter, and they'd sit on the top of the stairs and talk in the middle of the night, yet she plots to kill her daughter. You don't think she'd throw George under the bus if she's plotting to kill her daughter? When she testifies, it's amazing. She knows Billy and Jake are going to kill these people on Union Hill Road. She sees them walk out the door. Does she call 911? No. Does she call Hannah Mae and say, run for your life? Does she call Dana? Does she call Chris Sr.? No. Does she call anyone? No. She testified she went to sleep. She's got problems too. She believed a 2-year-old. If you have a granddaughter or son or whatever, and you suspect a 2-year-old is being abused, you take her to the emergency room, to a doctor. You talk to her mother or grandmother. She didn't do any of that. Jake, we know he's a mama's boy. They're liars, con artists, and thieves. Angela is an arsonist. Gets dogs from the pound and dyes their hair. She's manipulative. You can't believe a word that comes out of their mouths. It's unreliable evidence. How many people did they lie to? Well, you could make a list. And they've indicted her for the murders, which they should have. They were seeking death against Angela. They dismissed every aggravated murder count against her. She's not being held responsible at all for these murders. She will get out of prison with their permission. And he points right to the state's table. She sold her testimony. She's a con artist and a liar. Nothing she said about George can be verified. Oh, he had nightmares and smudged a footprint out. Actually, Jake testified he smudged out a footprint with a rug. That's where Angela's getting that from. Oh, George offered to take the fall for the family? Really? You're going to rely on that from that woman? Jake said George participated in building this piece of plywood, if you believe that ever happened. He said George dug a hole in the barn after the murders. How do you prove that? There's evidence about the shoe prints, and they did a good job investigating that. They found the shoes. They found the video of Angela buying the shoes. They found the receipt. How many did she buy? 2 pairs. Jake and Billy were planning these murders. She didn't buy 3 pair. She bought 2. That's because Jake and Billy planned. You can believe some, none, or a little of his testimony. If you believe anything from Jake, don't forget this part. He said George tried to talk us out of it. George didn't want it to happen and only went along at the last minute to protect me from my crazy brother. So I kind of was scratching my head and I was like, why are you telling them now that George didn't go? And it took me a minute. My brain kind of clicked back together. All the synapses were firing in the right direction. He's saying, look, if you're going to believe Jake, believe this part. George didn't want to go. He was not really involved in anything. That's kind of what he's saying. There was no family meetings and I'm sick of hearing about it. Angela said, I saw the boys in the kitchen and asked if they really wanted to do it. How can you verify that? Jake never testified to that. These are excellent investigators and prosecutors, but there's a fatal flaw in their case. Their theory was custody, and it's not about that. When you have a theory, they only look for the evidence that confirms their theory. They don't look for anything to contradict their theory, and that's called confirmation bias. There's evidence of that here. Jake and George allegedly dyed their hair before the murders, but Jake testified it had nothing to do with the murders. But they can't give it up because that's part of their theory. The tattoo George got, we brought the tattoo artist in. It was his idea. Had nothing to do with these murders. They can't give it up. Jake and Angela testify. Angela. Hey, there you go. I just thought of her like internet name, Angela. It just came out. There you go. Jake and Angela testified it's about the abuse, but the state persists on custody. Billy was into drug dealing. He's a doomsdayer. He taught these kids really bad things from a young age. He's not going to get Father of the Year, that's for sure. He took a truck of stolen stuff to Mexico and came back with $100,000, which the boys counted. Billy likes to make a quick buck. Was that the motive here? I can't say. There's no reliable evidence he saw this Facebook message. Jake and Angela said it was Billy's idea to kill. So he goes to say there's differences between George and Jake. And he has a picture of Jake that he shows the jury in his cosplay clothes. And Parker says he's in his little leather outfit. This is a pose on the right, guys. I'll have a link in the description that the character on Resident Evil does, by the way. I used to play that game. I'm an 80s girl. I game. Fallout 76 is my jam. If you're on PlayStation 4 and play that, inbox me. I'll give you my user tag. Okay, so then he moves on to George, who everybody who was on the stand described him as a country boy who would rather be in a deer stand, riding his four-wheeler, fishing. Jake would rather be in his video games. Remember that Resident Evil? He's into zombies. How do zombies get killed? You shoot them in the head. What about that knife? The one they found in the concrete bucket that wasn't broken on the tip? The zombie apocalypse knife, by the way, he says the tip wasn't broken. If you remember yesterday, Prosecutor Canepa kind of tried to explain that away. Well, maybe it was the metal in the door. The first time I saw that knife, I said, that tip's not broken. And then they talk about Jake's composition books. He's making these juvenile drawings, secret spy case, 2 Colts, suppressors, toolkit. This is Jake. He's a disturbed young man, way different than George. George isn't perfect, but he's not Jake. He spent time away from home as much as he could, but you have to consider his upbringing. Every victim was shot in the head. Every victim. Poor Hannah Hazel was shot right in the eye. Frankie just below the eye, both multiple times. Kenneth shot only once, but right in the eye, just like Hannah Hazel. Gary and Chris were covered. Dana was covered. Jake is the only one who went into crime scenes 1, 2, 3, and 4. The muzzle flash, the only way he saw that muzzle flash is if he was the one standing over Kenneth and shooting him in the eye. He said he was in the truck, which was behind other trucks about 100 yards away. Our expert said he would have had to have been looking at the exact moment it happened. And even then, you have the blinds, you have the light. There's no way he saw it unless he shot Kenneth in the eye like he did Hannah Hazel. Jake testified he moved Hannah Mae's body after he killed her, but denies moving Chris and Gary. There is going to be a graphic photo of blood on the floor coming up. I'm just giving you a heads up. It was shown today in court. I'm comfortable showing that. It's true crime. I will never show a dead body on here, but I will show this. So they say that Gary and Chris were dragged and then covered with a blanket. Mr. Priest said if one person is there, you drag them. If it's 2, you carry them. So they talk about the recliner that Jake says Gary was shot in. However, there's no blood at all on that chair. The blood on the floor, it belonged to Chris Sr. Gary's blood was in the kitchen. This is the rug Jake said he used to smudge out the footprints. He didn't turn it to where I could get a screenshot. And then, so we have this photo of, and just your warning, look away if you don't want to see it, of this very narrow hallway with bloody drag marks. So this is the narrow space where the bodies were drugged. When they did the Faro scanner, we asked them to measure this distance, and it's 27 inches, which is a little more than 2 feet. What's important is this old wooden chair with the bag of garbage on it. It wasn't disturbed whatsoever. So who drugged the body through here was able to fit in that area. Billy, he's 6'6", big guy. You heard Jake say Billy was hysterical. You think he's going to drag bodies in that little space being hysterical? No. Jake doesn't put George in the house at all at Chris Sr.'s, by the way. Jake said he got the keys from Chris's pocket and went to the grow room to get the DVR. And then it says there's blood on the door. Whose blood? Gary's. Jake pulled those bodies. Gary was first. Chris was second. And now it's time for a word from our paid sponsor of the week, BetterHelp. You know, it would be nice if life came with a user manual, such as when you have your first baby or you're navigating tough losses in life. Unfortunately, as we know, life does not come with a user manual. So when it's not working for you, it's normal to feel stuck. Navigating any of life's challenges can make you feel unsure, whether it's a career change, a new relationship, or becoming a parent. Therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of the challenging emotions and learn productive coping skills, which makes therapy the closest thing to a guided tour of the complex engine called you. Therapy can help you learn to cope with past trauma, can give you coping mechanisms to the problems in your life, and give you a neutral person to help navigate the problem, big or small, we all face in life. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with the therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/whattheworld. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/whattheworld. He said he got Gary's blood on his hands and put it on that door. There's Gary's blood on the path in the grass to the grow house, and that's from Jake pulling Gary's body. There's no tire tracks anywhere. The truck pulls into the grass. Billy's driving. He's 300 pounds easy. Jake's skinny, and Jake wasn't hysterical. Jake's skinny little body can get through there without disturbing this bag of garbage on the chair. The trucks, no hay flew out anywhere in Chris Sr.'s yard. The hay's going to add weight. Jake wants you to believe he crawled out with his gun and he was laying under there, and Chris is 30 feet away and doesn't see Jake. Not believable. Did Jake fire those shots into the door from along those lines you saw? Sure. Doesn't mean he was under a truck. If it's Billy and Jake, the truck bed makes no sense. When Jake agreed, his first idea was to strangle pregnant Hannah Mae and kill Corey and make it look like a murder-suicide. Even Billy said that's crazy. This is very interesting theory, y'all. And I'm going to just say, I look at things like a juror. And so you wonder the lack of DNA, palm print, fingerprint, any kind of evidence other than some shoe prints they couldn't tie specifically to the Wagners. How? Well, this is the defense theory, and I think it's a good one. Not saying this is what happened. I'm just saying if you want to put reasonable doubt in the jury's minds, this is how you do it. Billy could have dropped Jake 50 yards away and let Jake walk down to go do what he did. This truck bed makes no sense. This is part of Jake's fantasy. They want you to believe, and it's significant, that he led them to the murder weapons. They had no idea. It was in a bucket in concrete in a lake. But that's Jake's conduct, and he verified his own conduct, and he did tell them about the truck they found. I can't say it wasn't used. Suspicious what Billy did that morning with the truck, but that's not George. Katie didn't say anything about a platform or hay in the back of that truck. What makes sense is Billy dropped Jake off in the area. I mean, dude, like my mind was blown. I had to pause it and get coffee and think. All right. Crime scene 2, nothing implicating George. That's Frankie and Hannah Hazel. Crime scene 3, Jake didn't miss a shot the whole night. He stood on top of them, killing them. He covered Dana, manipulated Hannah Mae's body in a gross way. They show a photo of Dana's front door. And he says that was the blood picture. My bad. And he talks about these rugs. He says, if you look in Dana's front door, there's a welcome mat, a square. Then he shows several other pictures. I couldn't get a clear screenshot, but it's from little Chris's bedroom looking into the living room. You see the welcome mat. Shows another when they're getting the shoe prints with the dust. You see this half moon rug. Where does that come from? Jake said when he's inside Dana's, he gets down on the floor to see if she's in there in his room. That's another thing the state never cleared up. So he's in the hallway. He fires from that position and hits Hannah Mae in the forehead, according to Jake. The coroner says she shot in the back of the head and back of the ear area. The shell casing on the other side of the bed under the crib. It bounces off the wall, the ceiling. He's a liar. He's a cold-blooded executioner. Crime scene 4, George isn't there. They claim he's at a cutoff. How do you prove that? It makes no sense. Why sit there? It's far away. It makes no sense. The motive, Jake and Angela had one. Billy, maybe drug-related motive or on board with the abuse idea. But George didn't get along with his family. And he got into fist fights with his dad. He couldn't stand Jake's personality. He spent as much time away as he could. They lived and worked together, but it doesn't mean they liked each other. He was born into this family, and he talks about Virginia, Mr. Roten, not Roden, Roten. Remember the guys that would come and lease and hunt on their property once a month, and he visited and missed the opening day of deer season because his friend was getting married. He told George to change his life. George didn't have teachers or coaches as role models. He was isolated, and Mr. Roten talked some sense into him. And after Vine was born, George really straightened up his ways. George thought his family was being framed. Look at the evidence from George's point of view. Billy said it was Skid Montgomery. Listen to the tapes from George's point of view. He can't believe his family did this. Listen from that angle. When BCI interviewed him in Montana, and at the end, he told George, either you're a suspect or you're a witness. George said he asked Jake if he had anything to do with this after that. Montana stopped. Jake said no. George believed him. There were a lot of questions about Montana. The state asked, did you hear a recording from Montana? No. Did they bring in an agent from Montana? No. Why? You heard Angela's. They know they're being recorded. Boom. Big thing, because I had some tweets lately with people confused and I think the defense didn't want it in. No, I think the reason we never heard it is because it's full of them trying to get George to work with them. Hey, dude, you're not a suspect. We don't think you had anything to do with this. That's really going to kill your case if you either have an agent on the stand or you play the recording. Otherwise, as much as that was relied upon in this case, why not play it and just let the jury hear? And that's something the jury may be thinking about, y'all. So with Jake, they took the truck and bought it and did this demonstrate, or they took the truck they bought and did this demonstration. When did they do that? After Jake was done testifying in this trial. Not after his proffer, a year and a half ago. They want you to think he purchased the 1911 at the gun show. Did they ask Jake if George was there? No. Do they have photos from security cameras like they did at Walmart? No. They have nothing to show George's alleged activity. They got nothing on George. Only the word of Jake and Angela. And Angela threw her own mother into this case. Boondock Saints video, it's comical. They want you to convict on this movie. And Jeanette will appreciate that one. They show you a video of two cars in the night going towards Left Fork. Did they show that video to Jake and ask, is that you guys going down the road? No. It's two cars going down the road in the middle of the night. The truck recordings. George was up all night. Lots of caffeine, little sleep. If you're up for 2, 3, 4 days with no sleep, you're going to be irritable when you think BCI is framing your family. So stipulations, he talks about those. Blood evidence and George's weight over the years. George was a large guy his whole life, 280 to 300 pounds. Consider who moved the bodies in that narrow hallway. If you think he was in the back of that truck for an hour, if you think they were in that truck, remember, Jake said Billy stopped and asked if he wanted to still do it. Jake testified, Dad asked me, not me and George, not us, me. George and Tabby, well, they started off young, set up by a family member. They were kids, 11, 12. She basically lived there, but they broke up and got back together and got married. He shows that wedding day photo with the Roden family. He says, look, who's George got his arm around? Frankie. This is the Rodens and the Wagners. George and Frankie started having kids. They didn't hang out. It happens between friends. Frankie had a lot of friends. George, not so many. He socialized at Big Bear Lake as a teen. That was his social life. I want to point out how hard it was for George to get up here on the stand given his background. Homeschooled to 14 and quit. Rather be alone in the woods, but not surprising given the chaos at home. He wanted to be a forester. As a child, his dad said, no, you don't wear the badge. You have to understand how hard it was to be in public and talk about the things he did on this stand. He broke every rule his dad taught him, and he did it for himself and his son. Jake and Angela have destroyed George and Vine's life. Vine was all he had. When Tabitha and George decided to end the marriage, he got a lawyer, took her with him, offered to get her an attorney. You think that lawyer and the judge both tricked Tabby into this agreement? No. George used the court system. He was concerned about Vine being with their family, which is a mess. They allowed Tabby to be sexually abused as a child. Who would want their kid in that? No one. Beth comes in the picture. George didn't approve. Why would anyone come into this family with this cloud of suspicion about 8 murders over them? They came back to Ohio, and then Angela says Sophie accuses Beth. George freaks out because he's had this experience with Tabby's family. Does he want to kill Beth? No, he just wants her out of the house. It's not unreasonable. Did he want to kill Tabby or her family? No, he didn't want her there for obvious reasons. He didn't want Vine there for obvious reasons. Why would he want to kill Hannah Mae with the same allegation? Hannah Mae was like his little sister. Why would he kill Frankie? He didn't. He didn't go along. It makes no sense. Look at the evidence from George's point of view. Walk a mile in a man's shoes before you judge him. It was a poem written by a school teacher in the 1800s. It's called Judge Softly. He says, I'm not going to read it all, but I'm going to read the end. And it says, at the end, brother, there but for the grace of God go you and I. Just for a moment, slip into his mind and traditions and see the world through his spirit and eyes. Before you cast a stone or falsely judge his conditions, remember to walk a mile in his moccasins. And remember the lessons of humanity taught to you by your elders. We will be known forever by the tracks we leave. In other people's lives, our kindness and generosity. Take the time to walk a mile in his moccasins. That's what we're asking you to do when you evaluate the evidence and the testimony of George. Jealousy. Jake was jealous, and he puts this picture up. Hannah Mae had another man. One is Corey and Hannah kissing. Lovely picture. He did. He said lovely picture. The other cuddled up taking a nap. That would enrage Jake. These are measurements showing that small size. Photos of Billy, George, and Jake. I just lost my place. You can't forget when judging credibility, the GoFundMe. Angela wrote it. Jake edited it. Can you imagine that? They kill these people and have the audacity to set up a GoFundMe. Photo of George getting his feet measured. He shows that one. Shows you how big of a man he was back then. He's lost a lot of weight. They have a break, come back. When Angela testified, she said Billy told her to buy 2 pairs of shoes. It was Billy and Jake who planned this. Jake testified he was the one to shoot one time a clear headshot to Chris Sr. to make it quick. Asked about the truck at Peterson, he said it was a green. Angela said it was a green Dodge. It's not. When Jake said he was at When Angela testified, she said Billy told her to buy 2 pairs of shoes. It was Billy and Jake who planned this. Jake testified he was the one to shoot one time, one clear headshot at Chris Sr. Angela asked about the truck at Peterson. She said it was a green Dodge. It was not. When Jake said he was at Frankie's with this zombie apocalypse knife, he got in and got in the back door. Billy was behind him, but guess what? He didn't see George there. The 70-something page affidavit, they thought the murders took place between 3 a.m. and 7:49 a.m. when the 911 call was placed. That's significant. The timeline Jake describes is inaccurate. Jake said he buried all the clothes. At scene 1, the bloody shoe prints, 2 left shoes, no right shoes. Is it possible Jake wore 2 left shoes? It's possible in this bizarre case. When Jake came back in and drugged the bodies, why are there only 1 set of shoe prints pointing towards the door? They're only coming out 1 stride apart. 2 left shoes. If there's more than 1 person, you'd see prints on top of each other going in other directions. George got nothing for his testimony. Jake and Angela did. Gary's blood was on the door of that grow room, and George wasn't in the chair like Jake testified. And Gary wasn't in the chair like Jake testified to. It's not possible. There's a lot of insinuations in this case. Look for the hard evidence. It's just not here. The goose box? Yeah, George helped him build it for his grandfather's birthday in February. He told you he put it in his truck, took it to the pond, and placed it in the water. Prosecution didn't ask him about that. In fact, they didn't even ask him any questions about the murders. Consider the defense witnesses, the Cinereskis, the pastors. Remember, we had them. They came down from Alaska. They knew the family, and they were shocked by this. The elder Cinereski said Jake was slower than George. Well, why is this important? That's someone who could be pressured to do something like this by his parents. George, he got into fistfights with his dad. George yelled at his mom. If they said we're going to kill 8 people, you think he's going to agree? The state calls him a rebel. Well, yeah, he is in this sense. He drove to Kentucky at 16 and realized, what am I doing? No job, no money. I better go home. He did it twice with Tabby, too. Tabby talked him out of it because she said they needed a roof over their head. He didn't have the fortitude to break away. Doesn't mean he didn't want to. Mike, his boss from Alaska, and Bernie Brown, they'd offer him a job right now, knowing what we know at this moment. It's got to count for something. Remember Sam? She had a hard time, and he took her toys and cash for her kid. That tells you something. Her husband And then he says, well, I don't know their current situation. George befriended him and helped him with his car. He said George was a good old country boy, not at all like Jake. You've heard a lot about social media. That Angela was into that. She was hacking away, kept a notebook with passwords. She hacked into Facebook and topics after the murder. She couldn't keep her face out of it. She told people they were being framed, but she knew. Chris Newcomb, like George's brother, helped build that new barn, traded guns. Chris Newcomb never saw the 1911 Walther Colt or the murder truck. These guns, lots of talk about guns. Guns are legal. George's circle of friends and family, to them, guns are like $20 bills. They're trading them for money. You hear about trade days. He traded guns for junk cars. Jake said the SKS was in the family for 10 years or more. George said on the stand he's had more SKSs than he can count. They never asked where his SKS was. The state never asked. He sold it to Ben McCann. Did you hear anything to the contrary about that? You'll get jury instructions from the judge. The law required you to use Jake and Angela's testimony with grave suspicion. After viewing it with grave suspicion, there's no proof beyond a reasonable doubt George was even up there that night. He was cross-examined. Compared to Jake and Angela, his mother wouldn't even look at him. Jake was laughing and smiling and smirking when talking about the murders. You going to believe those people? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt? I don't know what you'll believe. If you believe George was there, don't forget Jake said he also had no intent to kill. He went along at the last second. He was there to protect Jake from crazy Billy. Jake is jealous, and to commit these crimes, you have to be deeply disturbed. There's no testimony he shot anyone or that George was even there. Look at the timeline and the phone records. The records don't show when someone was killed, but they show when someone was alive. There's a large amount of time unaccounted for. They leave at 9 and don't come back until daybreak. He said they were at scene 1 the longest, but not a long time. It was actually Dana's, I believe. He said they were at the longest, and it was 15 minutes. After rain, by the way, which I looked up the historical rain times for Pike County on the night of the murders. 3:48 a.m. it started raining. Stopped by 4:15. If you remember, Jake said when they went into Dana's house, it had been raining. Not that it was currently raining, I don't think, but it had been raining. So that there would put them at Dana's house close to 4. Just saying. I was sleuthing, y'all. Had to tell you. His dad is jiggling a doorknob at Frankie's at midnight. They were awake. The coon hounds were howling. Dana was alive at 3 a.m. Jake said she was already dead. This has to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt. There's reasonable doubt. George got up here and testified. Compare his demeanor to Jake's. Take time to understand the evidence and look at it from George's point of view. I could go on and on about this case. As soon as I sat down, there'll be something I wish I'd said, but you understand our position. Return a verdict of not guilty on all charges. You took an oath. Follow that oath. Hold the state to their burden of proof. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Jake is gone for the rest of his life. Angela, well, they made that deal. George is different from Jake and different from Angela. And so that was kind of it. But I thought it was well put together, y'all. And I'm not pro Wagner, pro George, pro acquittal, pro whatever. I'm just saying, if you follow true crime regularly, you see this is a very, very, very weak case. Do I think it's possible George gets convicted? Yeah, I do. They didn't move this out of Pike County. There's been no national news about this case the trial since it started. Blows my mind. You could have moved this somewhere else, I think. But I do think a hung jury is entirely possible because I don't know if I'm a juror and I'm following my oath and take away everything I assume about the case. What else is there? We didn't get to see or hear Jake's demeanor on the stand. We didn't get to see how he acted. We didn't get to see Angela. We heard 8 minutes of leaked audio from Jake and that's it. But it's a big deal when you're telling a jury, hey, they got off the death penalty. And, she helped plan to kill somebody she considered a daughter. She'd throw George under the bus to save her own life. So I thought it was well done. I'm sure rebuttal will be good. Wilson is up. And I think that he is very good at what he does. I think he does a great job. So maybe he brought it back home for for the state. You never know. Last thing, this was put up in rebuttal. I have covered Sophia, number one. I've taken Vine out as well. I'm not showing their pictures. Also, Sophia, normally I blur their face out, but she was in nothing but her little kitty underwear. So I just blurred her out. But they've seems like they've kept this up on the screen the entire rebuttal. So they're driving home. This is a happy family. Clearly, after the murders, Jake's got the addition to that tattoo. I'm thinking maybe this could be Alaska. I don't know. But anyways, we will see what comes of rebuttal. Like I say, it's likely going to be tomorrow. I've got to go pick my kid up now and come back, get this out, take her a few places, come back for this live. But hey, it gives us something to listen to tomorrow because we're going to be deliberating most likely tomorrow all day. And then the waiting starts, the nail biting, the nervousness. Will they come back with questions? Will they come back wanting to see a video? It's going to be an interesting week, guys. By the way, Richard Allen, probable cause affidavit, I have it. I have put it on social media. I will do an episode tomorrow breaking that down. I'm going to update you on Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell, University of Idaho murders. Carrie Allen case still missing. There's a warrant out for her boyfriend. So I'm going to stay on top of it all. But for now, mom mode, y'all. Have a good one. We'll see you tonight. I will tweet out the links for the live. Bye.